Someone wise once told me that commons and uncommons are the backbones of a limited deck. Yes, you can pull the most amazing rare and mythic, and sometimes you'll never see them once though. I mean, there are games where we pull the most amazing mythic that should lead us into victory, but we don't pull them once in a single entire day. I mean, it's not just me, right? I hope that's not just bad luck on me. Commander Legends pre-release has just ended, and now we are entering the draft environment. And it's important to know which commons and uncommons are really strong and really powerful in a limited deck. So if you're ready to find out which commons and uncommons are valuable in the limited environment, let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to another Nerdful video. So if you're ready for more Commander Legends stuff, whether it's finance or whether it's more limited guide, go ahead and click those like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you missed it, go ahead and check out the 10 archetypes ranked, what I believe is from worst to best, just right above my head. And with that out of the way, let me explain the grading system on how to judge these cards. So an A means that this card is really good and that you should definitely include it in your limited deck if you're running this color. A B will mean it's pretty good. It has an upside that might be situational, but it's still pretty good overall, so you should definitely consider it. A C being this card is alright. It may have an upside that is pretty situational, but it will fill a slot in your deck if need be. A D being a very vanilla card. Think of it as your 2/2 for 2 with no ability. If you need it to fill a certain slot, definitely put in your deck, but it's something you can pass on. And then F being you don't really need this card in any situation, or it's strictly a sideboard card. And with that out of the way, let's get started. Gilonra, Caller of the Wirewood. Wow, that is really hard to say. So I would rank this card about a C. It's on the weaker side, not necessarily something I might want to be playing as a 3-drop, but it can get really powerful later on as you start playing your big bombs and you just need a card resource engine. Kangi's Lieutenant. I would rate this card about a C, maybe a C+. It is great in a blue-white flyers deck, but other than that, it might not really have a spot even if you just need a flyer body. I would only really consider this in a blue-white flyers deck. Miara, Thorn of the Glade is definitely a B card. It's a good early drop and has a powerful effect. You don't have to swing with it to activate its ability. It's not a fantastic card late game, but it is certainly a good early drop and can get you that early resource you need. And even in the late game, it still has some value, even if it drops off a little bit. Humble Defector. I'd rate this card close to a C-. It's not quite D territory because it's a little bit better than the vanilla, but also giving a card resource engine to your opponent is a bit weird and not necessarily something I want to do, but it's a decent body with a good ability that can at least get you the cards that you might need early on. Reclamation Sage is definitely a C card in my mind. You might not run into opponents who are heavy on artifacts and enchantments, but you are bound to run into some opponents who are, and it's a decent card I would play as a 3-drop. Faith's Fetters is definitely a B+. It's close to an A, but I don't think it's quite an A as when it comes to removal cards because it's a bit expensive, but it's good to gain the life as a removal card. Daring Saboteur is probably a B card in my mind. You have to attack and swing into opponent to trigger its effect, and it's definitely on the weaker side, but you can pay 3 and it does become unblockable. So in the late game, if you're just at a standstill, it is something that can get in there, but it is no game finisher by itself by any means. Feast of the Succession is definitely an A card in my mind. A board wipe that powerful is pretty good in the limited environment, and also becoming the Monarch as an additional upside. I mean, I'm not really sure why I wouldn't play this card if I was in a black deck. Burning Anger is around a B-, maybe a C+. I think it's a little bit more on the B side, but the problem is that the enchantment, while it is very powerful, it's very expensive and it doesn't give the target hexproof. So you need to play it in a way where you can at least protect the creature because it will be probably removed right away once you slam down its enchantment. Monstrous Onslaught is probably a C card. It's not the best removal in green. Green already has a tough time with direct removal spells, and this one's quite on the expensive side. Yes, you will be playing big creatures in green, but you also need to make sure they stick, and they'll probably get removed as quickly as possible. But it's a fantastic card if you have a powerful creature to use this card's effect to. Arden is definitely a C card in my mind. His effect is pretty good, but it doesn't really do that much to help you win the game, but it can at least help you get the equipment that you need on the right creature, or even the auras. Glaceon is probably going to be our first F card. This card is very expensive, and unless you're running a lot of artifacts, which in a limited environment you don't want to be doing all the time, you don't really need this card to do really anything. And it's not even a good blocker, so I would pass on this unless you have some crazy artifact synergy going on. Pride of the Perfect is a low B, high C card for the green black elves. Other than that, this card really has no place in any other deck. But if you are playing green black elves, which is definitely a powerful archetype, this card is very, very good in that deck. Explosion of Riches is definitely going to be an F card. Drawing a card for this much mana is kind of ludicrous, and an opponent may be willing to take 5, and you've just given them a free card for something that they didn't really have to do besides take damage to the face. So unless you are using it to be kind of cute, I would pass on this card. Numa is definitely an A card in my mind. It's got good stats for a 3-drop, but more importantly, its effect is super, super good. If you're playing green black elves, you definitely need to pick this card up. But even if you're playing green, chances are you're going to pick up a couple elves, and this card still does well with those few elves that you are playing. Intangible Virtue is a low C. It's not quite a D card, but it's definitely a low C card. It only really works for a tokens deck, but it is a very, very good effect for the tokens deck. It might be able to keep your tokens alive from big board wipes. Estuar is definitely a C card. He's got the right stats for a flyer, but his effect is very, very narrow. So unless you're partnering him with a commander that you want to protect, he's not going to really do much beyond being a blue flyer. Faithless is also on the same level as Estuar. Its effect is very, very narrow. It's a pretty strong effect, but again, it's very, very narrow, and actually in some cases is worse because he's not protecting the commander. He's just buffing it in a way that's not hexproof. Fathom Fleet Swordjack is a B card. He's got a very, very specific effect, but the fact that he has Encore makes it from a C card to a B card. And you're probably going to run some amount of artifacts, whether it's for ramp or some really, really good equipment in this set. So he is actually a lot better than he looks. Ordeal of Nylea is definitely a high B card. It's not quite an A card because it's not removing anything, but it makes a creature really, really big, probably to the point where a single block is not allowed to probably has to be double blocked. And the fact that you ramp in addition when you get those 3 counters is really, really good when you need to filter out your deck properly. Vow of Duty, I don't want to quite say it's an F card, so it's probably a D card. It's nice that you're incentivizing someone to not attack you, but that doesn't really mean that you're helping your other situation, because you might be making the other players mad in this case. So honestly, I would pass on this card, and if you see it in the last few couple of rotations, consider picking it up. Scholar of the Ages is a B card. There are some fantastic instants and sorceries to pick up. It's not an A card because its body is a little bit on the weaker side, but it's definitely a high B card because using your removal spells once again is a really good thing to do in limited. Nadir is a C card at best for the green black elves. I don't really see him being used beyond that. Maybe in the tokens deck, but still his effect is super, super narrow, and he's kind of pretty expensive to play, so I wouldn't really jump on him being a commander, or really even being a card in general. There are better black cards to play, even if it's not an elf for green black elves. Frenzy Saddlebrute is an A card in my mind. It's the fact that it has haste and makes all your other creatures have haste makes you a big threat all of a sudden. So you can really, really just pour out everything and just try to finish the game as soon as possible. And usually when you're in red, you're at least considering playing bigger butts. So chances are you have multiple threats to play beyond this one. Skill Behemoth. Look, this card was really, really good in the Omniken set. I don't remember if it was Omniken or Hours of Devastation that this card came out. Playing a card that has hexproof that's this big makes it really, really hard to answer, and you now have a safe target to put your enchantments or equipments on. So now you've got even a bigger threat. So if you're in green, definitely don't pass on this card. Return to Dust I don't want to say it's an F card because it does have a really good effect, but it's such a sideboard card that I definitely wouldn't consider it in the main board. So whether you think it's a D or F, it's up to you. Vow of Flight, once again, another Vow card, puts it in the D category. You're not really removing a threat, you're just putting that threat somewhere else. And again, you might be making other players more angry at you. Nithir's Nightblade is close to low B. It's a high C card if you're in white-black tokens. If you're not in tokens, definitely ignore this card altogether. But in a token deck, it's nice to have this kind of effect, and it's got decent stats to protect itself. Furnace Celebration is probably going to be an F card. Red-black Sacrifice is probably the weakest archetype in my opinion, and this card's effect is a little, I don't want to say it's expensive, but you know, 2 mana versus 1 mana can be huge. And honestly, I would just play up straight up red removal. So unless you're really all in on the red black sacrifice archetype, you can pass on this card. Sifter Worm is, I'm gonna say it's an A card. 7/7 trample is good by itself, but the fact that you get to scry 3 and then potentially gain a lot of life out of it is pretty insane. It's pretty hard to answer. It needs a direct spot removal. Straight up damage usually won't do the trick. It's definitely on the expensive side, but if you're playing green, you're probably in some form of ramp anyway. So if you're in green and you have got a good enough ramp, play this card. First Response is a B card in my mind. Whether you're in a tokens deck or not, if you're playing white, this card is pretty good all around. Creates a blocker that can chump block if need be, and if you're in a token deck, it probably becomes a close A, probably a high B plus more likely, but it's a great card all around. Malcolm is definitely an A card for pirates, and if you're just playing it for flyers, he's still, you know, around the B area because you might have other blue flying pirates, because there's plenty of those. So get this card if you're in blue-red pirates, and you can still consider it whether you're in blue-white flyers. Noxious Dragon is a high C card. I don't want to quite say he's a B card because he's a little expensive for the body that he is, but he's got a really good effect if he is removed. So all around, pretty decent card. He's just a little too expensive for my taste. Vow of Lightning, another Vow card. Again, I might be misjudging where all the vows go in terms of the D category. You never really know how the politics of commanders work, especially if you're playing with people that you don't know. So I would honestly just pass on the vows as much as you can if you're allowed to. Slurk is strictly a green-white card. There are cards in green and white that separately give +1/+1 counters, but really it's for a green-white counters deck. But if it is in that deck, this is definitely, I would say, an A card, honestly. It's just really good in a green-white counters deck. Becomes closer to a B, maybe even a C in a deck that's not fully dedicated to +1/+1 counters. But again, since there are individual creatures that do give counters by themselves, it's enough to at least consider. But if you know for a fact you're not playing counters in green, avoid this card. Kelith is, I don't want to say a C card. He seems a little bit better. I'd give him a high C. His stats are definitely weak. And if you have a commander that's, you know, really great that you're swinging with all the time, then Kelith looks really good. But other than that, he doesn't have much else going for him, but still a pretty good effect overall. Merchants Raiders is close to an A. He's a he's definitely a B plus. I would consider him an A minus in a blue-red pirates deck. Even in a blue deck in general, you're probably going to pick up a couple pirates, and this card's really good. Just make sure you have some ways to protect it, or beef it up just a little bit so it gets out of direct kill range. Tormod is a C card in my mind, but he gets a lot better if you're playing the blue-black graveyard recursion. It's got good stats. It can be an aggressive attacker if you need it to be, but chances are if you're playing this card, you're probably all in on blue-black, and for the most part, I would probably hold this card back and just pump out a bunch of zombies. Togo. Look, this might sound weird, but I think Togo's an A card. The fact that you get a really honestly pretty powerful effect for just playing lands is really good. Keep in mind that those rocks are removal spells in of its own, and you get more of them the more you play lands. So if you're flooded, you at least have some positive benefit, and he comes out decently early for this powerful effect. Stinger Fling Spider is, I'll say, a B card. You can still play him whether or not you know your opponents are in flyers or not, because he's got a big count for toughness to at least, you know, block a good amount of creatures coming their way. But the fact that he just straight up removes something with flying is really incredible. Make a Stand, in terms of combat tricks, there's a lot of removals that specifically exile or give negative toughness, so it's not the greatest, but Indestructible is always really welcome, so I give this around a C+, probably a B. Aggressive Rumir's Defector is definitely a B card. This card has a really strange second effect. I'm not really sure how you're going to trigger this all the time in limited, but the fact that it can't be blocked by creatures power 3 or greater is really strong. So if you just find really good equipments or enchantments to put onto, you're in a good shape. Victimize is a high B card. It's not a removal spell in black, but its effect is so stinking powerful that it makes red-black sacrifice look really good. Keep in mind that if you don't even have a single Victimize in a red-black archetype, you might want to avoid the archetype altogether. But this card, whether you're in that archetype or not, is really good either way. I want to call this guy Rugrat, but because I really don't know how to pronounce his name, so I'm just going to call him Rugrat, honestly. He's a weird card to evaluate. Honestly, though, I think he's a D, because if you're not heavy on equipments or enchantments, he's not going to do anything for your deck. But if you do have powerful equipment and enchantment that you do want to play, this card becomes really solid. Strength of the Pack is, honestly, it's a C card. It's a very powerful effect, but for 6 mana you might be better off playing a big creature or a good removal spell or something that really impacts your board. Keep in mind that, you know, the creatures can still be removed. They're a lot tougher to remove, but things that spot removal right away is going to make this card look a little silly. Open the Armory is honestly an F card. Even if you're in the red-white Voltron decks, you might be better off just, you know, waiting for those equipments or auras to come your way. It's just a slim effect for, you know, really not that much value. And it doesn't affect your opponent's side of the board. So if you're in red-white Voltron, I mean, it becomes, I guess, a D and maybe a C card. But beyond that, if you're not playing red-white Voltron, you can definitely ignore this card. Sanaya of the Storm is definitely an A card. Whether you're in blue-red Flyers or, you know, blue-red Pirates or really anything, this card is really good because there's just enough creatures with flying in separate colors to warrant this card to be played in really any deck playing blue. It's good, honestly, by itself, but the fact that it gets even better is insane. Gumbaj Witches, I honestly think it's an F card. Its effect is it's fun. I mean, if you've seen game nights, you know how silly this card can get, but there's not a whole lot of things that you're going to be pinging for one. And the fact that you tell an opponent to also ping means they can kill off one of your creatures. So I'm not really I'm not really sure that you want to be playing this card. Dargo's a B card. He's a bit expensive, and yes, you can get him out for cheaper, but keep in mind you have to be sacrificing stuff. He's definitely really best in the spot of blue-red Pirates where you can be sacking treasures to activate its ability, and it's good that he has trample, but he will probably be target number 1 because a lot of people, especially in a game of Commander, and if this is your Commander, they don't really want to be taking 7 trample to the face. Armorcraft Judge, I want to say a C+, maybe a B card. It's strict. I mean, it shines in a green-white counters deck. But if you're not all in on counters, its effect gets really weak all of a sudden. But there's enough creatures in green that give counters for it to at least be considered. Orzhov Advocates is probably a B card. The fact that each player gets to do is a little insane, even if that creature doesn't get to attack, because, you know, if an opponent, for instance, just played a 6/7 hexproof crocodile and decides to just make that bigger and bigger over time and then finally swing out when the opponent decides it's big enough, which really only one time would do it, you might be putting yourself in a much bigger hole than you intended. But it's still a good card and a great way to put counters, especially if you're in green-white counters. So it is definitely a B card. Just be cautious how you use it and definitely consider the board state. Siren Stormtamer was played in standard. It gets a little bit weaker in a limited environment, honestly, but it's still a C card all around. It's a 1/1 flyer and has a pretty decent effect that's really cheap, and it's a good way to protect yourself or a creature that is under considerable threat. Armax is a C card. He's a good card, but his upside effect is very limited, and you all have to be playing a good amount of artifacts for this card to, you know, do some work. But a 3/2 for 3 is still good, and there are definitely a lot of good equipments in this deck to consider playing. So it's better than it looks, but it's not phenomenal by any means. Kedis is, I don't want to say an A card. It's not like a game ender by any means, but it's a B card. If you partner with the right card, it could do some serious work, and it's really cheap to get out. But it is pretty situational in that sense, but again, that situational is very good. Inara is probably one of the better partner commander buffering cards. Indestructible is a very, very good card. This card is able to defend itself with its toughness pretty well. So I would give it a B plus. I'm not ready to give it an A yet. It's not a game ender by any means, but its positive effect is insanely good. Patron of the Valiant is B plus, almost A territory. It's a great flyer. Its effect is very, very specific, but it can do some serious buffering for your team, especially if you're in green-white counters. Order of the Isle is definitely an A card. It's a great flyer all around, and the fact that it can make flyers cheaper is insanely good. Whether you're in blue-white flyers or you're in blue playing a set amount of flyers, still makes this card extremely good. So if you're in blue, pick this up. Even if you're in blue-white pirates, this card will do some work for you. Another Vow of Torment. You know where this is going. I'm putting it in the D category. Again, you know, you're not really removing the threat, and you're potentially making more people angry at you. So all vows getting a D. Witches is definitely an A card. It's good by itself, but obviously it gets better with the more pirates you have. But I would play a 4-mana 3/3 menace any day in a red deck. So the fact that it has an insanely good positive side to it, definitely an A card in my mind. Vow of Wildness. Okay, D, moving on. All right, we've gone over this. No more vows. We're good. We're good on vows. Proverb of the Steel Legion is a C card. The fact that its effect is only on your turn makes it a little bit strange, honestly, but the fact that you can pump out tokens with this card is pretty good. So now that I think about it, it's probably close to a C plus, maybe a B minus, but it definitely shines in a white-black tokens deck. Supreme Will is definitely a B card. The fact that you get options, whether you get to counter or, you know, make sure that your next draw is looking really good, makes it a B card in my mind. It's not a game finisher. It doesn't, you know, really help your side of the board unless you're just removing the biggest threat in the world that you're countering, but it's still a great card because it has options and it's cheap. No Caller, I don't want to say it's an A card, but it's definitely a high B card, definitely a B plus in my mind. It's just a great card whether you're in blue-black reanimation or you're just playing, you just need this card in a black 4-mana slot. So the fact that it's a little weak means you'll probably never be swinging with it, but the fact that its effect is insanely good means that you should definitely be playing it whatever your archetype is in the limited environment. Coastline Marauders, I'm going to say it's an A card. Generally by turn 3, it's going to be a 3/3 with trample, which is decently good by itself, but the fact that it keeps getting bigger and bigger the longer the game goes, and the fact that it has Encore is insane. It can definitely be a game ender. Hunter's Insight, it's a high C card. It's a card advantage that green desperately needs, but it's not. It's a little expensive in my mind, so that's why it, you know, prevents it from being in the B category. But it is a card with a great upside that green desperately needs. It's just maybe not gonna really help you in a lot of situations where the game is getting a little bit too long and too wide. Radiant Sarah Archangel is a high B card. The fact that it's a little too expensive makes me want to prevent it from giving A, but it's such a good card, and the fact that you can give protection from all 5 colors, keep in mind that you would have to not attack with 5 flyers, makes it still a very good card. It's just a little bit too much on the expensive side for me to kind of consider it giving an A. Adrenaline is just a B card all around. It's expensive, but its effect is very powerful. Keep in mind that you would have to consider playing a lot of high drops in the deck if you really want to make this card work. So that's generally not what you do, but it is a good card all around, great body, and can be a game ender in some situations. Normally I give Cast Down an A, but the fact there are so many legendaries running around makes it closer to a B. It's not a C card. It's still a good card all around, and definitely some threats that are not legendary you need to remove, but it's not an A card by any means because there's just too many legendaries running around. But definitely pick this up if you're in black. Elena is an A card in my mind because not only is it a pretty good offensive card by itself, but the fact that it ramps, which is, you know, very rare in red unless you're green-red, this card is gonna really help you out, especially in some tight spots where you just need to plop down more bodies. Iktekik, honestly, it's probably an F card because, you know, again, you might not be playing a lot of artifacts, especially if you're in green. I'm not really sure what green deck wants to be super heavy on artifacts, unless, you know, you find a lot of good artifact creatures. But even then, I really don't see a place for a deck to be using this card in general. All right, we'll close out this segment, part 1, with 5 more cards. So stick with me here. We're almost through. Rebic, I'm honestly going to give it an F. Even if you're in Red Red of Voltrons, you might not really consider this card because, you know, most people might not be main decking artifact removal. So you'll be fine with or without this card, honestly. Confiscate. Controlling permanents has always been a pretty good strategy. They're always on the expensive side, but they can be a game ender. So I'm not quite ready to give it an A, but it's definitely a high B plus in my mind. Demonic Lore is a D card, honestly, because you're still losing life and it's not a card you want to be playing early on. It's definitely going to be a great late game, but it might be a dead card in your hand for the most part. So, you know, think about, at least if you're going to consider this, when and how to play it. Meteoric Mace. They should have just called this Meteor Mace. I'm not sure what the extra IC there is for, but this is probably a C card. It's an expensive equipment and still makes the target susceptible to removal, but +4 trample is no joke, and definitely needs to be considered if you're facing against this. Appears perfect. It kind of depends. If you're playing green black elves, it definitely becomes an A. If you're playing a green deck with just, you know, some elves, it becomes a B. And if you're playing a deck with no elves, well, there's no reason for you to play this. So it's very situational, but, you know, even if you're playing minimal elves, it's still pretty good card. And the fact that it can make tokens helps you out. So even if you're not heavy on elves, you can at least still consider it for just creating tokens. Well, that's all I have for you today. I didn't want to do everything in one sitting because I don't think a lot of people would be watching, honestly. I don't think an hour and a half of grading individual cards is something people want to watch. So if you are interested in seeing the rest for part 2 and part 3, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button down below. Or if you just want to see any sort of gaming content, gaming analysis, or talk about the gaming culture. Thank you all so much for helping me grow this channel. It's been an amazing journey, and I've just really appreciated all the kind words and kind comments. You guys are awesome. Keep playing, keep pulling those amazing cards in your packs, and I'll see you for your next Nerd Fill.